Another Paul Bunyan story? Well, let's see. There's been a truckload of stories about Paul. Wait a minute. I hear someone say, who's Paul Bunyan? Well, I better tell you who he was before I tell you what he did. Wouldn't make sense no other way. For those who don't know, Paul Bunyan was a logger. But Paul weren't no ordinary logger. Matter of fact, he weren't no ordinary human being. Drop! Drop! It was his size. Drop. Paul Bunyan was bigger than any man I've ever seen, and bigger than I ever expect to see.
Shrunk. Shrunk.
Why, when he was only 6 months old, his ma had to fix him a bed outdoors. Well, now that there was a big baby. As he grew up, Paul just kept getting bigger and bigger until when Paul was fully grown, he could stand in Illinois and cast a shadow clear across to Kansas. Now that there is a big, big man. Things went well for Paul. He built up a good logging business and he was respected.
Splash, 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 splash.
I'll never forget the time Charlie Svensson got himself hung up on a wavered log.
Splash.
Well, Paul was right there to see him. One day, a curious thing happened. The crew was eating breakfast and looking forward to a day of felling trees. Then in the distance they heard a boom, boom, boom. It sounded like Paul walking in the woods. But Paul was sitting right outside the door. Well, sir, they looked through the trees and saw a huge mountain of a man approaching.
Crunch, crunch, crunch.
When he reached camp, he said, "You're Paul Bunyan. I know that from your size. Everywhere I go in these United States and as far north as Nova Scotia, I keep hearing about you. How powerful strong you are, and how ding-dong clever. Well, I'm Hell's Helson, Bull of the Woods. And I figure that when there's two men on the face of this earth that are as big as us, they got to meet and see who's the best man." Well, Paul Bunyan took Hell's Helson's hand like he was an old lost friend. He said, "Hell's Helson, I've got no quarrel with you or any other man. I've made it a practice all of my life never to use my strength against another man, no matter what his size or temperament." Finally, Hell's roared, "You afraid to fight?" "Nope," said Paul. "Hey, yes, don't believe in it. I don't believe in doing injury to another human being. But I'll tell you what. I'd like you to be foreman of this here logging camp. We can tell a lot more how strong and smart a man is by what kind of logging he does." Hell's kind of grumbled and grunted and said he'd do it just to show everyone. Paul gave Hell's his own axe, which was the only one his size, and sent him out with the morning crew. Well, sir, Actually, they weren't too unhappy to be working under a man like Hells. He was so anxious to show us how powerful he was that he did the work of 60 men.
Splash.
However, after a week or two, the most interesting things began to happen around camp. The first thing had to do with Paul's hotcake griddle.
Stunk.
That griddle was so big, on a cloudy day you couldn't see across the thing. The grease that 6 cooks skated around with slabs of bacon tied to their feet. Well, that same morning, Hot Biscuit Slim poured on 2 tons of batter, as usual, and waited for it to cook. Chunks of hotcakes as big as boulders went flying in all directions. Do you know what caused that explosion? It seems that someone had dumped a case of dynamite in the batter. And it wasn't hard to guess who did it. Well, they figured Paul would blow up. But he didn't. A couple of days later, Paul asked Hells to clear a road leading up to a redwood stand he'd found in Oregon. The crew didn't see how Hells could bungle this job, but that's because they just weren't using their imaginations. When Paul came to inspect the road, he found that it twisted and turned and snaked around so many curves that men going up the road meant themselves coming back. The men all held their breath, waiting to see what Paul would do. Well, he took Babe, his big blue ox, and, I guess I'd better tell you about Babe, the blue ox. Well, Babe was an ox, and he was blue, and that would be unusual right there. But Babe was also the biggest blue ox in all creation. Why, he was so big that one day an eagle started out to fly from one horn to the other. Well, when that eagle started out, he had a full head of hair. But when he reached the other horn, he was bald. A bald eagle. Anyhow, Paul hitched his blue ox to one end of the road. Paul held the other end and shouted, "Okay, Babe, pull away!" The ox pulled that road out straight as an arrow. As a matter of fact, Paul had 22 miles of road left over that he cut off and sold to the government at a handsome profit. The curious thing about all this is that instead of Paul getting peeved, it was Hells who seemed to be getting redder and redder every day. Of course, there has to be a limit to a man's patience. And this limit was reached the day Hells took it out on Babe, the blue ox that Paul loved so much.
Sniff, sniff, sniff.
What he did was, he fed that poor dumb mountain of an animal 14 tons of poison sumac. Well, that sorry blue ox developed the biggest case of hay fever you ever saw. After a while, Babe recovered and Paul was able to turn his full attention to Hells. Hells, Helson, I wanna talk to you. And with that, he led Hells out across several states and up onto Mojave Mountain.
Strip.
Paul told Hells, you take this and write on this mountain 100 times, I will never again hurt a dumb animal. Well, Hells was first relieved, then angry. With that, the two of them got to whacking away at each other with their fists. After 3 days of the most awful noise, the mountain, well, it was borne clear away by the scuffling of those two giants. Yes, sir, just pulverized to dust and sand. In fact, it's no longer called Mojave Mountain. It's called the Mojave Desert. But they weren't finished yet. They fought each other through the state of Arizona, gouging out the Grand Canyon. They carved away a cliff in upstate New York, creating Niagara Falls. They plowed a furrow right up the center of the country that became the Mississippi River, and knocked each other down a half-dozen times, creating the Great Lakes. To climax this fight of the century, Paul landed one final blow that sent Hell sailing up into space, where he eventually hit the moon and was never heard from again. Paul Bunyan. Now that was a big, big man.
This is the story of John Henry, and I'll tell it like I heard the tale. Big Bend tunnels beat him down, oh yes. You can hear the train whistle wail. As a young boy, John Henry took a hammer and said, now there's a wondrous thing. He swung it down on a rail he found just to hear that hammer ring, just to hear that hammer ring. John Henry took his hammer to the railroad to show them what he could do. They set him to driving railroad spikes. He drove them hard and true. He drove them hard and true. And then he said, oh Lord, this is right for me. I can see what I am in your heavenly plan. Oh Lord, I'm a still driving man. John Henry had a cute little wife. Her name was Polly Ann. She watched him silent with his fist on the hammer. He was her still driving man. She said not a word, but her heart beat heavy. My John ain't never coming back. My John ain't never coming back. Dead in the center of the path of the track was a mountain reaching up and touching sky. John Henry looked up, shook his head and said, we'll never get that track that high. We'll never get that track that high. John Henry went to the section boss and he asked him, what we gonna do? The answer he heard made his hands turn cold. The boss said, we'll tunnel this track right through. We'll tunnel this track right through. The shaker held a drill against the mountain and John Henry struck the first blow. The men all cheered, but Polly Ann feared, and John Henry said, let's go. Day after day in Big Bend Tunnel, John Henry and his crew drove still. He laughed and he sang and his hammer rang. Lord, I like that feel. Good Lord, I like that feel. Ooh. All through the summer, you could hear him with John Henry's hammer in the lead. The men followed John as fast as they could, but they weren't making any speed. And then on the 66th day, the section boss said, I'm bringing in a steam drill now. The country is waiting and winter's coming, and we've got to get through somehow. 14 men brought the steam drill in, spewing white hot sparks all about. John saw it steaming and the crank housing dripping and the drill chewing coal and spitting out. And the drill chewing coal and spitting out. John Henry went into the tunnel with an extra heavy hammer this time. And somebody screamed, he's taking on the steam. And men came running down the line. Men came running down the line. John Henry told the shaker he could go now. Then he took his place in front of the wall. He was gonna beat that steam drill all by himself, using just his hammer. That's all. Everyone watched as he started. John Henry was on the left. He said, before I give it and let the steam drill win, I'll hammer myself to death. I'll hammer myself to death. Now the steam drill was slower than John's hammer, but it was right around the clock. And John could have wept, 'cause while he slept, the steam drill kept on chewing rock. The steam drill kept on chewing rock. John was behind on the left, and the drill was leading on the right. With his muscles knotted and his face dripping sweat, John's hammer flashed all through the night. Of all the people who were watching were Polly Ann and his little son. Her dark eyes said, save yourself, John Henry, before your life is undone. Before your life is undone. John Henry knew what she was thinking, 'cause he loved his little Polly Ann. But he felt his veins pop and he couldn't stop. John Henry was a steel-driving man. Polly Ann took her little boy and turned away and started walking down the track. She knew right then for sure, John Henry ain't never coming back. John Henry gripped tight on his hammer The people outside were all waiting to see who would win the race. And the question went around like a rumble in the ground. Could John Henry stand that pace? Then with one mighty blow, John Henry broke the tunnel through and said, I beat that steam drill down. Yes, I did. But I'm dead. Oh, Lord, I'm dead. But I'm dead. Oh, Lord, I'm dead. John Henry died. Oh, yes, he died with his hammer